J.B. Pritzker gets in the race for governor, and they're still arguing about the budget at the State House. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. Political season is here again, but so is legislative season. We'll see what happens. With me to talk about it today, Adam Rife is back. He is anchor and reporter for WICS News Channel 20 in Springfield. Welcome.
Thank you, Bernie.
And Andy Maloney is back. Andy, State House Bureau Chief, Chicago Daily Law Bulletin.
Good to be back, Bernie.
Welcome. Okay. J.B. Pritzker, another candidate for governor on the Democratic side, announced late in the week in Chicago. I believe he's touring the state. He joins Chris Kennedy of the Kennedy family, Daniel Biss, state senator, Bob Diber of Southern Illinois, Alex Petrakis, a young guy from the suburbs, and Amewa Pawar, an alderman from Chicago. What do we know about Mr. Pritzker, and what is this race looking like so far ahead of 2018?
Well, it's been cordial right now. We've had Biss welcomed him to the race, Pawar welcomed him to the race publicly, and then, of course, each of them are sending out campaign flyers as it happens that J.B. Pritzker, another billionaire, and that's the thing that's going to jump out to people is big money here on the Democratic side between him and Kennedy, and, of course, that really looks like Bruce Rauner in a Democrat's clothing. So we'll see those guys on maybe the smaller end of the financial side. Really, I think, putting a bullseye on Mr. Pritzker.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's been cordial. You can already see, though, the dividing lines emerging in this race. You've got Kennedy and Pritzker, who are obviously wealthy, sort of have that capability of self-funding and doing it significantly the way that Governor Rauner did for himself back in 2014. But then you have Senator Biss and Ameya Pawar, who are sort of trying to appeal to more of the grassroots, perhaps more of the Bernie Sanders type
yes, the more
campaign.
Progressive comes through a lot.
So you can already sort of see those lines emerging, and you can understand almost where they're going to take their critiques as it starts to get more active on that side of things.
Yeah, as the event was happening in Chicago, Twitter was helping. Twitter is, of course, the greatest political tool now for everyone, but I was watching some of the comments that were being made, and Mr. Pritzker was wanting to take the state back from Rauner and the Koch brothers, and it's not about wealth, but about progressive values, and he will propose a tax on millionaires and billionaires, as opposed to, the people who can't afford it as well. And he called Governor Rauner a failure who is holding the state hostage to a right-wing agenda. So not unexpected. And what do we know about Mr. Pritzker? He is of the Hyatt Hotel family. He, according to the Forbes billionaires list, he's one of the richest people in the state, but he is worth more than $3 billion, and Governor Rauner is somewhere hovering around $1 billion. So he's got a lot of, but he's not really in the hotel business himself. He has other businesses. And he helped start up a business incubator in Chicago. I think it's called 1871. So he's all about job development and early childhood education and a lot of things he's gotten into with the family. And his sister, Penny, was Barack Obama's Commerce Secretary. So the Pritzker family is well known. We'll see where it goes. And of course, the Republican Party already is trying to link him and had a video out immediately upon, even before, I think, the announcement, linking him to Mike Madigan and how he's donated to party causes and he's just part of the machine and that kind of stuff. How far does that go versus the campaigns to come?
Well, I think what Bruce Rauner and Ken Griffin and friends have done in the past
and
election
Griffin is
cycle,
the richest man in Illinois.
There you go.
Donates a lot to Governor Rauner and other of the organizations that back him.
So we have a theme here, but what they did in the last election cycle in 2014 was change the face of Illinois politics going forward, and we know that's obvious, but it also might price out some of those better candidates. I'm not saying Mr. Pritzker isn't, but I think we're going to see a division between who can write the checks versus who has the best ideas, and it may not be the same people in this next election cycle. So Mr. Pritzker may be able to back it up. That's nothing against him, but I think Democrats are also looking at, they spent $50 million last time around, and it's only going to be more, next time. So I think they have to get ready for a record election here.
And that hammer that maybe some of the Democrats starting to wield of a wealthy sort of billionaire candidate who's out of touch, that could be applied to Governor Rauner and has been, but also the incumbent president, Donald Trump, businessman, wealthy guy, out of touch. That's going to be their characterization, I think. And you look at this being a midterm, President's Party usually always loses some seats in Congress, at least during a midterm. We'll see if that sort of trickles down to Illinois. Hillary Clinton did very well despite losing the presidential election in Illinois. So I think the Dems have a lot of ammunition going forward.
And it's interesting you say that because I recently listened to when Governor Rauner was over in Eastern Illinois or gave a speech. I think it was actually Monticello, Piatt County, so it's more central, East Central, and talked about how, Hillary unfortunately won Illinois, but we're going to pick up more seats, and we're hoping, basically saying 2018, we're hoping to flip the House, which means you'd have to gain 9 seats in the Illinois House to take it away from Speaker Madigan.
I had to read it twice in your article to make sure I read it correctly. He's expecting to get 9 seats. Now that
and it will be, as I pointed out in the column, it will be midterm for Donald Trump's first term. And as Andy just said, the first term, after 2 years of any president, usually the other party gets a great advantage.
Right.
We certainly
It's
saw
usually
that
that
in the
backlash.
sweep. Yeah. So he is hopeful, but he also, you mentioned the term 50 million or the amount, and we know Governor Rauner has already put that much just as a down payment into his own campaign account just in December. Mm-hmm. So we will go on. One other thing, just from the Central Illinois perspective, another person who had talked about possibly running for governor was State Senator Andy Manar from near Carlinville, Bunker Hill, that's right, who did announce he's staying in the Senate, he's not running for governor, so he's one of those guys who doesn't, he also talked about families, got young children that he doesn't want to be away from for an entire 2-year cycle here as a campaigner, but basically said he's not going to do the governor thing, so that takes one more, makes one more change in that giant bunch of people who might run for governor as a Democrat. As we do this, the Democrats were coming up this week in the legislature with a plan to spend something just over $800 million on colleges and universities and social services. They called it a lifeline budget as opposed to a stopgap. The governor has said he doesn't want a stopgap of any sort. He wants a real budget with real reforms, the kinds of things business reforms and term limits and remap reform, things that he's demanded for 2 years in order to do a budget with new revenue. But the Democrats were saying in the House that this was something they wanted to make sure things keep operating, even as more and more people think there might not be a budget until the next governor's election, which means the next governor takes office in January of 2019. So Republicans are against it, Democrats are for it. This just seems to be more of the same kind of gnashing of teeth.
And I think that was the message from Governor Rauner on Thursday in Decatur. In the morning, he had took a couple of questions after an event, and he said essentially the same thing. He was asked, isn't some money better than no money? $800 million plus, whatever that amount is going to be. Isn't that better to assure some people that you can make it through? And he said, look, we've been doing that. That's the problem. We've been doing that for decades under Democratic leadership. And, it was a campaign speech all over again once he got into this, essentially shutting it down, saying if this comes to me, it's a no-go right now unless those reforms again. And we go back into that cycle and we start.
Yeah, well, he always says that we haven't had, this has been, we've been having out-of-balance budget for years, but we've never had universities on the verge of closing because they didn't have an appropriation or a budget.
Right. They're certainly in crisis mode, but it was Republican legislators in both chambers who kind of endorsed that same message, unsurprisingly, but they came out this morning. The governor's message, I'm sorry, yes.
Right.
The governor's message of just, hey, stop gaps, that's essentially what we've been doing, sort of in the Mike Madigan reign, as he might characterize it.
Of course, the Democratic House Speaker from Chicago, who's
Correct.
been the Speaker for most of the last 30 plus years.
Correct.
Republicans said that last summer, at the end of May last year, when they did get the previous stopgap budget done. They said, that's it. That's the only one we're going to do.
And they agreed to that one, and the governor agreed to that one,
right,
just as a way to, without reforms, but we'll get reforms next time, which is always the promise.
And the Speaker's spokesperson, I believe it was in a Sun-Times piece about that, sort of called back to that and said, well, he came out and denounced all of this last year, and look what happened. We did get a stopgap. So I think maybe they're hoping to kind of push him into that type of corner again, but so far he's sort of stuck to his guns on that.
Well, it's funny, when the Republicans, it was members of the House and Senate, had a press conference to say that, this is terrible, we don't want this stopgap or lifeline, it has to be something real. Their list of events, or of things that were needed on a cardboard thing, on poster, it basically matched what the governor's been saying, including term limits. So I asked Senator Bill Brady, who's a former governor candidate, but of Bloomington, represents part of Springfield. You've been in the legislature 20 years. You really think term limits are needed to fix the budget? And he said, of course, yes, it's needed because we have to show the world that we're a change state, that kind of thing. So they're mirroring the governor, and the governor's also been a continuing presence and an increasing presence really on social media. So it seems like every couple of days now on his official government account, he's putting out a Facebook message. Hello, everybody. We must do this. We can't let the Madigan budget do this without reforms and property tax freeze. That kind of thing, and he says property tax freeze about 5 times, and capping spending. So he's sticking to message. He's getting his message out. He's also running. We're in the middle of $1 million ad campaign from the governor, and it's 18 months before his next election. Right. Assuming he doesn't get challenged in the primary. And I don't know. I talked about it on the show last week, but that might be seen as poisoning the well, but I guess everybody's so political now that's just to be expected.
He said everybody's seeing the duct tape on their TV screens by now. When asked about it, aren't you throwing fire, aren't you taking aim when you really shouldn't be and let things play out? And he said, I'm just getting the message out. This is a way for us to get the message out. Well, not always the case, especially when it's big money coming from outside the state right now. Some national organizations are getting behind him. So, as you mentioned, 18, 19 months away from the actual election, and it seems like we're already starting to ramp up. Good news for advertisers. We're not going to see any of that
congratulations,
money,
commercial television.
There you go.
I would also say that he says in almost all of his messages that his plan is for a balanced budget, but PolitiFact Illinois, which is part of Reboot Illinois, or in cooperation with them, called that a pants on fire statement, an untruth, because one line in his budget plan, and the whole budget is only like $38 billion or something, is like $4.5 billion from the grand bargain, which the governor has now turned thumbs down on, and is not getting through the Senate, and so he's never taken the step to propose what tax increases should be there, because he doesn't want to be accused apparently of proposing taxes, because it's just like the state Republican Party came out when Pritzker announced for governor and said, oh, he wants to raise your taxes. Well, the governor has said all along, we're going to need a tax increase, but he'll never say what. Right. Because then nobody can make those ads against him yet.
Right. And I think what stood out to me on the budget specifically is kind of those divisions. You saw some factions sort of stand out this week, where you had this Republican press conference where they're saying these are the things we need, and they're very similar, almost the same as what the governor has proposed, but there's no Senate leader Christine Radonio present. They said, well, she would endorse some of these things, but as we know, she was a big supporter of getting the grand bargain done. You also had a couple other Republicans bring in this budget idea that said, let's not do any taxes, let's just do all cuts.
Senator McCarter, who's one of the most conservative members, said, yeah, we can do all this without taxes. And he said, we've got Democratic ideas in here. And I asked him at that thing, can you name any Democrats who are signing onto your plan? Well, I'd love to name them, was the response. But clearly they weren't part of his plan. He was just saying the ideas in some of their bills are also in mind, like perhaps reforming how we purchase equipment and that kind of things to save money here and there, or pension changes.
What strikes me in the past week in hearing these different proposals is that 21 months in, 22 months in now without a full spending plan, and instead of narrowing the focus, and there was for a time earlier this year when the Democrats and the Republicans in the Senate came together, but instead of narrowing the focus on what these plans are going to look like, it's starting to splinter out again, and you're getting that House stopgap plan, you're getting the governor saying no to various other proposals, the McConkey-McCarter plan that was announced this week.
Which is the no tax increase plan, and also to
cut agency.
Basically make all school districts over a period of time pick up all of their pension costs that are now paid for by the state, while you're also capping property taxes locally. Some of this is going to be tough for the locals to add up, and a lot of people are saying that can't be done.
There's the disconnect there, and then on top of everything else, the grand bargain in the Senate is still being debated, and so some of those bills have passed, others keep going on, and so what strikes me is you don't know which one to focus on yet, because the governor's weighed in on some, he hasn't weighed in on others, and you don't know who's on board in the individual chambers. So
I would agree with
that.
A
whole lot to juggle right now, and to try and ferret out the numbers and figure out which ones are going to be solid and how they're actually going to affect people is difficult right now with all these different plans.
Let's talk about one specific case, and I think it's gone on to the governor now because it passed the Senate a week ago, or within the last several days, and then it passed the House. The governor's office, or this Department of Corrections, announced that they were going to be letting go 124 nurses, and they were going to hire a company called Wexford Health sources, Wexford Health Sources, which already provides some medical services to our prison system. There's been some controversy and lawsuits, but they want nursing to be taken over, partly because the nurses have to do a lot of overtime. Now they say it's because they don't have enough people, and they're also in a contract dispute with the governor, and they say this might be retaliation for that. The administration denies it. But there's legislation that passed through the Senate and now the House saying that it would block the administration from privatizing those jobs. And I'm sure the governor, if he gets it, will veto it, and then we'll see if it gets overridden. But it's another indication in the middle of the budget impasse. We also have these labor disputes, but we also have this privatization problem. The governor, in his labor dispute with the biggest labor union, AFSCME, American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, wants to impose his conditions, which includes outsourcing more jobs to the private sector or having public-private partnerships. And that's something that isn't happening yet, and the legislature is taking an active role. It's a Democratic legislature. Where does this go?
With AFSCME specifically?
Or with the nurses, I guess.
With the nurses? That's a good question.
They're all good questions.
It's there. We'll find out, and on we go. Another one of the budget problems that is continuing in the state, in addition to the whole budget not being resolved, there's a school aid formula. We talked about Senator Menard, who's been working on that for a few years, trying to make a more equitable school aid formula, because our smaller and rural school districts tend to get a lot less money because property taxes are so much a part of the mix. So the property rich or company rich districts, particularly in the Chicago suburbs, may spend 3 times per student what they do in some downstate districts or in some poorer areas. Well, there were 17 school superintendents, including towns Pana and Taylorville, who had filed a lawsuit, I think it was in St. Clair County, saying they need more state money to meet state standards. So this is just part of, again, an ongoing problem. And the Chicago Board of Education, or the Chicago Public Schools, they've also filed a lawsuit saying the state isn't giving them enough. So where do we go? Andy, can the courts resolve this?
They could. However, at least the Supreme Court has been reluctant to do so. There have been previous cases that have talked about the school funding issue, as far at least as the 90s. And for the most part, they've been reluctant to come in and say, this is what is a high quality education. This is sort of what is the goal here, and thus you need to spend more money, fund more money, change the formula, whatever the resolution is. So the schools say that those cases are sort of inapplicable now because since then we've gotten sort of these statewide learning standards that everybody has to adhere to. And they've got a couple of constitutional claims that basically say you can't impose the same standards on everybody while giving each school district, each school different levels of money. Again, that's no guarantee that they're going to be successful or that they won't change the formula or something like that between now and when this case is ultimately resolved. But it's certainly interesting that there are now 2 of these, the CPS one, the downstate schools, and of course Senator Menard and others have been doing tons of work on this issue. So it's back on the radar.
Yeah,
I think what they've been doing, laying the groundwork, Senator Menard for years working on, it was SB1, it's morphed into different things over the years, but talking about the inequity and the unfairness. But with this lawsuit from the 17 superintendents, now they're finally saying, we have data that's showing we're not meeting the standards that you yourself have set. So Governor Rauner said again in Decatur this week that after an event, he understands he's on their side. He just doesn't know what else he can do right now until there's a full budget. And again, the answer for everything, it seems right now, is a full budget that also has those reforms. I don't know if that's really going to fall on sympathetic ears for these superintendents right now. That's not going to help get kids what they need.
Interesting. Well, we did have a local election last week, and even if there's a property tax freeze, that would allow some local tax increases if voters agree. Of course, it takes a lot to get voters to agree to property tax increases. They did have one that passed last week in Taylorville.
Right.
There were threats there that they were going to do away with art, do away with most of their extracurricular sports programs. I think they left varsity football alone, but got rid of the rest. I mean, so how do you do that? And they got people in town to vote for more. But some of these superintendents from small districts were saying how terribly difficult it is and what to just try to meet the needs of the kids. And they've got fewer teachers and fewer administrators and larger class sizes as it goes on. So we'll see where that goes. There were some other interesting results in last week's race. One of them that got particular attention in the state, there's a guy named Roger Clark, who is the mayor of Bolingbrook, which is, if you take I-55 to Chicago, you always pass through Bolingbrook, right up there. He's been mayor for more than 30 years. He hosted at the Bolingbrook, it's a city-owned golf course up there, a fundraiser for Donald Trump during the election. And so a woman who was, I think, a union person ran against him for mayor, saying Bolingbrook voted for Hillary Clinton overwhelmingly. I think it was 60%. And as we have seen the results now, Roger Clark ended up holding on to his position by about 100 votes after all kinds of Democrats, including Dick Durbin, the senator, and lots of people were putting in money and appearances. In fact, J.B. Pritzker, I think, was one of those who was supporting the opponent to Roger Clark. Is the Trump factor going to be a significant thing in the next election?
It's to me inescapable. I mean, he sort of looms over quite a lot of these things, and you saw this mayor's race get tons of attention around the state and nationally. I mean, there were folks in New York talking about this. So I think it's sort of inescapable that he comes up and continues to come up like most presidents, but perhaps maybe in a more significant way. There were other suburban mayors who also lost, and so you might say that it's not just a Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal thing, it's also an incumbent thing. There is sort of a general distaste for incumbency.
And there was a guy, he actually ran, I think it was for state treasurer a few years ago, named Dan McLaughlin, who was the mayor of Orland Park. And he got defeated with a lot of money from Liberty Principles PAC, which is Dan Proft, who's a Republican activist, who was the guy that ran all these ads against Sam McCann for Senate last time here. McLaughlin lost that race. And he's a good Democrat. I don't think it was partisan on the ballot, but he had also was trying to they had moved in Orland Park to make the mayor a full-time position and raised its pay to like $140,000 or $150,000. So that was a much better issue than in most mayor's races. So we'll see where that goes. Adam, you mentioned duct tape earlier because of Governor Rauner's advertisements. There was a little controversy about this that fixed into the continuing controversy between our comptroller, Susana Mendoza, the Democrat, and Governor Rauner. The governor was on, I think it was within the last several days, maybe the Friday before last weekend, with Steve Cochran on WGN radio show, big station in Chicago. And Cochran made some kind of comment, had Governor Rauner on the phone, maybe you ought to use the duct tape and put it over Susana Mendoza's mouth, because she criticizes the governor all the time. And the governor made a noise, which I think they characterized as cough, but Mendoza thought it was a laugh. And there was a press conference that day in Chicago, and they accused the governor of anti-woman language. Positive, negative, or just part of the scene these days?
I think it's part of the scene. I think what I've been surprised by Susana Mendoza's personality, just the force of her personality coming out so hard against Governor Rauner. And maybe that's my naivete after 2 years of Leslie Munger filling in after Judy Bart-Topinka passed away. But they've been at each other seemingly every week. But, in fact, this week struck me as a week where they weren't bickering back and forth. So that was a surprise.
Maybe the duct tape had an effect on some people. I don't know.
We're waiting for it. But, I listened to the tape a couple times, I'm sure you guys have, and the governor didn't say yes, he didn't say no, there was a noise, trying to analyze that. That's not for me to decide, but I just think it's part of the landscape right now.
Yeah, and sort of the back and forths after that, you could say that there was opportunism sort of on both sides. The Illinois GOP, which obviously the governor has a big stake in, came out with the statement after the Mendoza press conference saying, this is her just using this to attack us unfairly and the governor unfairly.
And what's interesting, they had a woman make that statement.
Correct.
Instead of the usual guys who are making that statement.
It's so easy to make a mistake that will cost you votes or cost you money or cost you support. I think a lot of times each side is just trying to goad the other side and see if they can make that mistake, see if you can get them to make a mistake. Here's a difficult situation. Let's see if Governor Rauner can get out of it. Let's make something of this. I'm not saying that was the case, but oftentimes you're looking for opportunity to let them make a mistake.
Well, we'll see where it goes. We talk about the Democratic race for governor a lot. Nobody really thinks that anybody will challenge Governor Rauner, who has clearly indicated he's running for a second term. There was, however, a little bit of an indication this last week, and it was odd. It's Politico, which is Natasha Korecki in Chicago, used to be with the Sun-Times, runs a tip sheet every day of all kinds of stories. And one of the ones that she actually developed was she had heard rumors that Sam McCann, who's a state senator from Macoupin County, and represents part of Springfield also, who once considered in 2014 running as an independent for governor, is being urged to run again, or might be considering running again as a Republican, because he's the one that voted with unions against the governor on a bill that would have allowed arbitration with the AFSCME contract.
And the unions voted with him.
And the unions voted with him, and he said he backs his people, even though he's a very conservative Republican on most other issues, certainly on financial issues, but he represents his constituents, he says, in the union stuff. Anyway, he responded that many people are encouraging him to think about it, or some people are encouraging him to think about it, but he feels that it's important right now just to work with the legislature and the governor to get a budget and worry about politics later, and nobody should be talking about the next election yet.
I'm a patriot, he said.
He did.
He said, I don't believe we should talk about it during a legislative
Yes,
session.
do we think we're going to see Sam McCann run for governor?
Man, I maybe don't know him well enough to know if he'd actually go through with it, but an independent candidacy, you would have to think.
And I think it might even be a Republican candidacy.
At this point, okay.
Yeah.
I just know that I enjoyed the characterization. I mean, you wrote the article of being casually approached to run for governor. I just wonder sort of how that works.
Yes, and I do think
if he were running against Governor Rauner for governor of Macoupin County, I think he'd probably get in the race. But statewide, I just think it's too big of a challenge to get that name out there.
I think you might have a point. With that, Adam Rife and Andy Maloney, thank you for joining me. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.